This is an interesting case of a 37-year-old gentleman from Bihar state who was accompanying mother who was being treated for metastatic medullary thyroid cancer, and he is also an uncle of a known proband of Men2A patient who was treated at SGPGI. And the treating resident noticed a thyroid swelling in this patient, and they suspected that this man also can be a patient of Men2A, and further detailed history, examination, biochemical and genetic evaluation was done for this patient. On further inquiry, patient is not aware of any thyroid swelling. He didn't have any history suggestive of any compression or hypo or hyperthyroidism. He didn't have any history of paroxysms of palpitations, anxiety, headache, diaphoresis or postural giddiness, heat intolerance. There's no history of pain, lump abdomen or epigastric discomfort. He didn't have history of constipation, and he didn't have any history which we expect in a case of Men2A. If there is primary hyperparathyroidism, there can be history of myopathy, polyuria, renal stones, irritability, easy fatigability, and bone pains or fractures. He didn't have any history of thyroid disease being treated in the past, and he didn't have any history of possible end organ damage like visual disturbances or chest pain, dyspnea on exertion, pedal edema, or decreased urine output. Coming to the past history, he didn't have any comorbidities or allergies. He didn't undergo any previous surgery. And family history, he had significant family history, as I'll show you later in the family tree. He has history of sudden unexplained deaths in the family at young age, and there were persons with thyroid swelling and malignancies were treated in the past. So this is the pedigree chart which shows that this is the patient proband A1 who was first treated at SGPGI, and the current patient is this is B6, and as we can see that the history we don't know at the great grandmother's grandmother of this patient era, and next generation, as we can see, the mother of the patient, that is grandmother of the proband, has died of metastatic disease, and the further this shows the red ones are the ones who have expired, the crossed lines, and this pedigree also shows all the persons affected and various diseases that they had. So on examination, patient was conscious, oriented, his pulse rate was 84 per minute, blood pressure 122/70 in supine position, 108/78 in standing. He didn't have any neurocutaneous markers like cutaneous lichen amyloidosis, any mucosal lesions or marfanoid habitus, but in this case Men2A, we don't expect them to have mucosal lesions or marfanoid habitus, but CLA is known to occur in certain codon 634 mutations. Coming to his neck examination, there was 4 × 3 centimeter hard nodule in the left lobe of thyroid, no lymph nodes, trachea was central, and carotids were palpable in normal location. Abdominal examination and rest of the systemic examination were within normal limits. His evaluation showed that he had raised basal serum calcitonin, and PTH was mildly elevated. He was vitamin D sufficient. His serum calcium was normal. His TSH is also normal. As we can see, since we have suspected Men2A in this patient, we went ahead with the urine metanephrine, normetanephrine evaluation, which showed that both were only mildly raised, in contrast to the previous case in which it was grossly raised. And further evaluation, his ultrasound neck showed that there was a isoechoic mass which did not show features of malignancy except that there was internal vascularity, but since he is coming from a family of Men2A, there is a high clinical suspicion for MTC in this patient. And further radiological examination, X-rays were normal of soft tissue neck, and CECT showed a well-defined heterogeneously enhancing lesion in the left lobe of the thyroid of around 3 centimeters. And there was another small focus which is in the right lobe. As we expect in case of Men2A, it is usually multifocal. And coming to the CECT abdomen, there was a relatively well-defined enhancing bilateral adrenal masses, very small in contrasting to the previous case which was sporadic. Here there are bilateral masses of around 2 centimeter size on both sides. This is the right and this is the left. So the nuclear medicine scans of this patient, we did a Dotanoc PET scan. which shows somatostatin receptor expressing lesion in the left lobe of the thyroid, as well as bilateral adrenal lesions. So we did a guided FNAC from the thyroid nodule, which showed features like poorly cohesive clusters of spindle-shaped cells with speckled chromatin, which are typical of medullary thyroid carcinoma. And the genetic analysis revealed that he also had a mutation which was like the proband mutation in exon 11, 634 codon, similar to that of the proband. So the diagnosis of MEN2A with bilateral pheochromocytoma, medullary thyroid cancer and primary hyperparathyroidism was made, and the plan further was to do alpha blockade and followed by surgery for adrenal followed by neck. This is what we have to note here, that though the patient presentation was with a neck mass, since we had taken detailed family history and confirmed he is also to be a patient of MEN2A, it is important to plan for adrenal surgery first followed by the neck surgery. So the principles of alpha blockade as detailed by Dr. Abhishek: there should be adequate control of BP, both systolic, diastolic and postural changes should be controlled, and we can use additional drugs. And the repletion of intravascular volume is very important, because as we can see from here, the the catecholamines cause volume depletion and many other changes. All these have to be restored by doing adequate alpha blockade, and there should be control of heart rate with beta blockers. Mind you, we have to first control the blood pressure, and there should be adequate alpha blockade, then only we have to start controlling the heart rate by beta blockers. And we should also monitor the hematocrit, because as the volume is diluted, there can be anemia. So currently there is a recommendation to alpha blockers to be used as the first choice for blockade in all the patients of pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma, and adequate blockade is minimum at least 7 to 14 days has been recommended. So this patient underwent alpha blockade for 7 days with prazosin. As we can see, there was no much of tachycardia. He didn't require beta blockers. As Dr. Abhishek said, Roizen's criteria have to be the standard to say the patient is ready for surgery. And further workup, his other routine investigations were within normal limits. His echocardiogram to evaluate any cardiac damage was didn't suggestive of any disease. His fundoscopy was normal, and he was fit under ASA category 2. So the preparation for surgery with low residue diet for first 2 days and followed by only enema was used if required, and we have given up on rigorous bowel preparation because it can cause electrolyte imbalance, bowel dilatation intraoperatively. And so after giving low residue diet for 2 days, we went on to give clear fluids the day before and broad spectrum antibiotics on the day of surgery, DVT prophylaxis by either stockings or pneumatic compression devices, nasogastric tube, urinary catheter has to be placed, and in the before starting the case, we also insert a central venous line and arterial line. And so the patient was planned for bilateral transperitoneal laparoscopic cortical sparing adrenalectomy, because the pathology in MEN2A is basically from the adrenal medulla. So cortex, as we know, produces important steroids, and which are required for which are very important for the physiology. So as much as possible, we have to try to do cortical sparing adrenalectomy, and total thyroidectomy plus central compartment lymph node dissection and right selective lymph node dissection, and total parathyroidectomy with IPTH monitoring was done. Introp findings, as we can see, there were no feature suggestive of metastasis, which is usually the case in case of MEN2A. They are benign. And we can see that there are 2 globular masses in bilateral adrenals, around 3 centimeters on the right side and around 2 centimeters on the left side. Left side there were 2 nodules. And as we can see, there was normal adrenal tissue also adjacent to the nodules. The maximum blood pressure was 210 millimeter mercury and minimum was 80/50 introp. Postoperatively, he did not require any inotropes, and he was put on steroid cover, because though we have done cortical sparing adrenalectomy, one has to be sure that the cortex is functioning. So prophylactically, we start the patient on steroid cover. There was intense pulse rate, blood pressure, CVP and urine output monitoring, and blood sugar monitoring is also important in case of pheochromocytoma, because the catecholamines would have produced a state of hypoglycemia, and which will become rebound hypoglycemia because of hyperinsulinemia in postoperative cases, situations. And neck surgery was done after 7 days. Total thyrectomy with central compartment lymph node dissection, which is the standard of recommended for MTC, has been done. And frozen section biopsy revealed that the right there was a metastatic lymph node in the right lateral neck. So right selective level 2, 3, 4 was done. And total parathyrectomy with IOPTH monitoring, as we can see, the pre-incision value of 14.2 fell down to 0.52 after the removal of all 4 glands. However, the right superior parathyroid was auto-transplanted in left brachioradialis, which is the non-dominant arm for the patient. Post-operatively, he was managed on levothyroxine supplementation. Here, in contrast to other malignancies of thyroid, there's no role for suppression, as the MTC arises from C cells. And so body weight into 1.6 times the dose was started. Serum calcium monitoring was done, and T-sign monitoring was also done. As we expect, we have removed all the parathyroids, and the auto-transplanted parathyroid will take time to recover from the function. So patient received calcium supplementations. So post-operatively, we follow enhanced recovery surgery protocol, after surgery protocol. That, as I already mentioned about bowel preparation, we also use minimally invasive approaches to enhance recovery, and we provide adequate analgesia by epidural IV patient-controlled analgesia or IV analgesics, and we start early enteral feeding and early ambulation. This patient recovered very well in the post-operative period, received therapeutic calcium, and the serum cortisol estimation done after skipping of the hydrocortisone revealed that he still has partially unrecovered function of the cortex, so we continued prednisolone for this patient. Histopathology revealed that there was bilateral pheochromocytoma with nodular medullary hyperplasia on bilateral, which is expected in MEN2A, that there is initial phase of medullary hyperplasia followed by formation of pheochromocytomas. And the frozen section biopsy final report showed that there were tumor metastasis in the lymph nodes in the thyroid, and left inferior parathyroid showed parathyroid hyperplasia. Total thyrectomy showed that there was medullary thyroid carcinoma with parathyroid hyperplasia and nodal metastasis. In the follow-up, we follow the protocol of course, after early post-operative follow-up, patient will be followed up at 3 months, 6 months, and then annually, depending on the how the patient does in the post-op. And he is on steroid supplementation. At 1 year, the serum calcitonin fell from the as high as 1300 preoperatively to 101 picogram per ml post-op, and serum CEA is 6.9, which is within normal limit, CEA. As we can see that the calcitonin still is not in the normal range, but this is expected in case of MTC because the rate of biochemical persistence of hypercalcitonemia is common. It doesn't mean that there is disease, but this patient needs regular follow-up. So the PTH, as indicated by the value of 2.9, the functioning graft, that means the parathyroid which was transplanted in the non-dominant hand is functioning, and his follow-up metanephrine, normetanephrine were within normal limits, and follow-up protonok PET has been done recently, which is, report is awaited. So coming to the brief review of MEN2A, it's an autosomal dominant genetic syndrome characterized by multiple endocrine tumors, multiple endocrine neoplasia like the medullary thyroid cancer, pheochromocytoma, and hyperparathyroidism. And there are subtypes depending on the presence or absence of tissue-specific tumors and phenotype characteristics and number of the affected family members. So there are clinical variants of MEN2, MEN2A, MEN2B, and variants of MEN2 like familial MTC, MEN2A with cutaneous lichen amyloidosis, and Hirschsprung disease, and other unclassified types of MEN2. So the screening for MEN2, whom should we consider? Why to screen, whom to screen, and how to screen? Why to screen? MEN2 carrier determination is a good example that mandates a highly effective clinical intervention. So, but we also know that there is a strong genotype-phenotype correlation between RET mutation, which is expected in MEN2A syndrome, and the clinical presentations, age of onset, and aggressiveness of MTC. Presence or absence of RET mutation can impact the management in patients presenting with apparently sporadic MTC also. Though these patients, most of them have MTC, at least 50% of these patients have pheochromocytoma, and it is important that we identify and treat these patients before going on to the surgery of the neck. In a suspected case of MEN2, if we take 100 cases of suspected case of MEN2A, at least 95% of them will have identifiable RET mutations because we commonly test certain exons, and we don't test certain other exons. So 95% of them are known to have known mutations, and 85% of the MEN2A families have mutations in the cysteine residue at codon 634, which is the case also at our center. And the remaining have mutations at the codons 609, 611, 18, and 620. Cutaneous lichen amyloidosis is known to be reported to be associated only with codon 634, except there's one case reported in the literature of a case of 804 who is known to have CLA, and 98% of the patients with MEN2B have an identifiable RET mutation which is in codon 918 in most of the cases, and 883 is also, which is on exon 16, is also known to cause MEN2B. And coming to the importance of finding out this MEN2A, 25% of all the MTCs are familial, and up to 7% of the patients with apparently sporadic MTC or pheochromocytoma have RET proto-oncogene mutation, and it follows, in case of thyroid it is hyperplasia, nodular hyperplasia, and medullary thyroid carcinomas. Like how I mentioned in pheochromocytoma also, there is initial medullary hyperplasia followed by nodular hyperplasia, and there is development of pheochromocytoma. So the aim of screening is to do prophylactic intervention for MTC if detected very early in the kindred, and for pheochromocytoma for early detection and appropriate management, because pheochromocytoma can cause multiple end organ damages, and hyperparathyroidism also it can cause irreversible changes in many organs. And whom to screen? All the cases that meet clinical criteria for MEN2 should be screened, and all cases of sporadic MTC, and all cases of apparently isolated or non-familial pheochromocytoma. Though MEN2 is not the most common mutation for in cases of pheochromocytoma, it is also one of the important syndromes that should be evaluated because it is treatable, and cases which do not meet MEN2 criteria but is suspicious or having atypical presentation should also be screened. Asymptomatic first degree relatives of a RET mutation carrier proband should also be screened, and relatives expressing one or other components of course should be confirmed, and it is usually done by RET mutation analysis confirmation. The other option is to do a biochemical screening, which only can determine whether calcitonin is raised or not, but as the literature has suggested, genetic screening is the most specific one to rule out a mutation in the patient. As we can see, this is the structure of the RET gene. There is a extracellular, intracellular, and transmembrane domain which has multiple exons as detailed in the picture. So it is done on the DNA extracted from peripheral blood leukocytes after doing a PCR amplification. Bidirectional sequencing is the standard of care. As I've already mentioned, 10, 11, 13, 14, 15, 16 are the ones which are usually checked for. There is a ATA risk categorization based on the codons into low risk, high risk, and highest risk, moderate risk, high risk, and highest risk. Highest risk is 918, and which is the MEN2B category, and 634 is high risk category. It's very important to do pre-test genetic counseling, that the family member should be aware why they are undergoing this testing and what are the implications if it turns positive or negative. As I've already mentioned, indications for genetic screening in pheochromocytoma are a patient having positive family history, clinical suspicion of MEN if the patient is less than 50 years, or there is a presence of bilateral pheochromocytoma, or there is association with other MEN tumors, or there is multifocal extraadrenal disease. This is the flow chart that shows how the protocol should be for genetic testing for pheochromocytoma. And a diagnosed case of MEN2 should be screened annually. If at presentation he doesn't have any evidence of disease, he has to be screened annually for pheochromocytoma through thorough clinical history, any recent evidence of any episodes of palpitations or diaphoresis that is typical of pheochromocytoma, usually which is not present, and physical examination, blood pressure recordings, and 24-hour measurements of urinary catecholamine and metabolites. We prefer metanephrine and non-metanephrine evaluation in 24-hour urine samples. As this comparison has been already detailed by Dr. Abhishek. One thing I want to emphasize here is that we don't measure epinephrine or epinephrine directly, because they have very short half-life and they are produced in episodes, whereas the metabolites like metanephrines and normetanephrines are sustained levels, and 24-hour urinary collection ensures that even if there was brief period of production of these metabolites, they can be estimated properly through 24-hour collection of the sample. Coming to the management of MEN2 briefly, depends on the phenotype expressed. Whichever component is expressed has to be treated, but for thyroid, prophylactic management is recommended. MTC is the most common cause of death in MEN2. However, having said that, pheochromocytoma, without knowing if we embark upon doing surgery for MTC, it can be devastating during surgery. Coming to the pheochromocytoma management, pheochromocytoma is seen in about around 50% of the positive cases of RET, and most common codon is 634, and for MEN2B it is 918. Always it is located in the adrenal gland. Extra-adrenal is very rare in case of MEN2A. If MTC is diagnosed first, the average time interval for pheochromocytoma may be up to 11 years, because MTC develops quite early on, depending on the type of mutation. Average age of presentation is around 30 to 40 years, and is usually always benign, bilateral in 50 to 80% of cases, and pheo as a first clinical examination is seen in about 25% of the patients. In 35% patients, MTC and pheo are diagnosed at the same time, and there is a strong genotype-phenotype correlation in pheochromocytoma also in case of MEN2 along with MTC. It is seen in almost all types of RET mutations except in codons 768, 804 and 891, and most common associated with mutations in, as I mentioned, 634 and 918. There are few differences amongst one of the most common syndromic pheochromocytoma, that in the case of MEN2A pheo, there are high levels of chromogranin B and eosinophilic granular cytoplasm and surrounding adrenal medullary hyperplasia on histopathology in case of MEN2A, whereas chromogranin B is not so high, and there is no surrounding adrenal medullary hyperplasia in case of VHL. So there is a strong incidence of bilaterality in cases of MEN2A in pheochromocytoma. So the localization, as Dr. Abhishek discussed, is done by CT, which is having CT and MRI have excellent sensitivity for detecting these tumors. However, we have to emphasize here that the biochemical diagnosis has to be done first before anatomically localizing them. And previously, MIBG was the standard of nuclear medicine scan used to confirm multi-locality. However, current availability of thin slice CT, CECT done across the thorax and abdomen and pelvis, if there is any multifocality suspected or metastasis, it is as good as nuclear medicine scan, in fact better. And the other important scans that have become available are DOPA PET, which are also useful. A microscopic examination of adrenal glands reveal usually diffuse or multifocal pre-neoplastic and neoplastic changes like medullary hyperplasia, nodular diffuse and nodular, followed by pheochromocytoma. And in men setting, usually almost always they are bilateral. And whether, as we know that it is going to be bilateral, should we do routine bilateral adrenalectomy if we detect disease in one adrenal, or should we do only that operate on that adrenal which is affected, is a controversy. And minimally invasive approaches are preferred. Choice of surgery, as we can see, the clear advantage of laparoscopic or retroperitoneal surgery over open surgeries in times of patient recovery and post-operative stay. So to summarize, all patients of known first degree relatives of RET mutation carriers should be screened, and all younger pheochromocytoma patients or with suspicion features like bilaterality and all apparently sporadic case of MTC should be screened for MEN2A, and genetic screening is preferred to biochemical screening. And RET mutations carrier prophylactic intervention of thyroid has to be done as per the codon, which dictates the age at which the thyroid has to be managed, and there should be annual screening for pheochromocytoma and hyperparathyroidism. And for a diagnosed case of men, intervene as per the phenotypic expression. First of all, it's very important to rule out pheochromocytoma. If there is evidence of pheochromocytoma, address that first prior to MTC, And unilateral excision followed by annual screening for the opposite gland is the preferred method, as we know that the adrenal is very important for the life of the patient. And hyperparathyroidism, selective or subtotal gland excision is preferred, or we can do total parathyroidectomy with autotransplantation if suspect hyperplasia in all the glands. So the lessons learned from this case are one should have a high clinical suspicion if in any case of thyroid swelling, and especially in case of MTC, and there should be detailed family history that is to be taken, which can reveal many things about the family and guide us. And genetic counseling is very important, and adequate evaluation for all the components of MEN2A has to be done, and they have to be kept under regular follow-up. And there should be optimization, and the appropriate surgery which is correct for the patient has to be planned. There is a need for a very good intra and post-op vigilance. And since if we do bilateral adrenalectomy, as we have done in this case, we have to be we have to educate the patient, and they should be under regular follow-up, and they should be motivated for lifelong follow-up. Last but not the least, these are the patients who require special attention from the healthcare providers, because they are usually many family members, and they may have financial, psychological, and they need psychological support. And one should remove guilt or stigma from the patients of MEN2A. And it is important that the healthcare provider gives them importance, priority during a OPD visit, and it is preferable to have special OPD days or clinics for MEN2A, and there can be get-togethers of MEN2A families, and there should be group education days. And there are many social groups which are on the social media, which are supportive for these patients. Thank you.